your voice is naturally more loud and resonant than pretty much anybody we've interviewed. So
okay.
I'm adjusting a bunch of mic levels.
Get the game
which is okay because I think mine will actually be competing to keep up with yours, whereas a lot of these recordings I've had to go back and edit myself down because I typically resonate a whole lot too.
Yeah.
Hello, and welcome to the Ride a String podcast. I'm Kevin Sluter.
And I'm Matt Moreno.
And we are bringing you a show about orchestra teachers,
for orchestra teachers,
and those aspiring to be orchestra teachers.
While the majority of us do our teaching in the classroom setting, there are also many educators who have utilized their skill set on a different path leading groups around the community. In this episode, Randall Smith, a conductor in the Baltimore area, talks about working with church groups, non-major college orchestras, and developing special projects that foster new compositions.
Yeah, well, it's been an interesting path. My parents are both musicians, but I, as a young person, as a kid, I kind of didn't want to do music. I very clearly remember my dad was the announcer for he was the choir director at a high school, but he announced for the marching band, the halftime shows. And so we'd go out there to the games and come back and whatever. And my parents, I think, used that as a way to get me interested in music. And I remember very clearly my mom saying, I was probably like in 6th grade. I had not joined. I was a late bloomer. I started late. But she said, maybe when you get into high school, you might want to be in the band. I said, Mom, that's what all the nerds do. Like, I didn't want anything to do with that. Little did I know where I was sort of headed with that. So, I kind of got a little bit of a late start. I didn't even start band until 8th grade. I didn't start in percussion, which is my instrument, but I started as a bassoonist. And then I didn't full-time go to just percussion until I was a sophomore in high school. So a little late the game there. And then I thought I wanted to be a drumline instructor. And certainly I love my percussion people, and I still consider myself part of the family. But at some point in college, I kind of got interested in the orchestra, and that bug sort of bit. And ever since then, I've been kind of on that general path.
Yeah.
So.
All right, and so your highest level degree you got is?
So I've completed my master's in conducting at Texas Tech, coming up on 10 years ago actually, and I'm currently working on my doctorate in conducting at the Peabody Conservatory.
Great.
Yeah.
And what have you been doing, professionally since your initial round of schooling?
Yeah, initial round of schooling, and then I immediately end up, after that, getting a master's in orchestral conducting, I ended up being a full-time middle school band director for 4 years in Dallas, and those were 4 wonderful years working with some great kids, and I also, during that time, worked on a new music project called the Dallas Festival of Modern Music, which I co-founded with one of your previous guests, Ryan Ross, and we ran that for about 3 years, and then I moved east, and another colleague that we worked with moved west, and Ryan got a new job at the exact same time, so at that point it was time to call it a day on that project, but those were kind of the things that were going on at the time, and then I moved to Maryland, and so I've been kind of working in Maryland ever since.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so you are in town right now. Just briefly, what are you in town doing?
Yeah, I'm giving orchestra clinics across the DFW region. I think I will be seeing 10 different schools. I think it's 28 or 29 different orchestras within each. If you look at each school, multiple groups per school, and I'll be giving I'm actually looking forward to kind of a homecoming of sorts. I'll be visiting my alma mater on Wednesday at Texas A&M Commerce and delivering a couple of talks along there. So
great.
Busy week.
Busy week. So without naming names or groups, without being this trip versus, because I know I think you did this last year too, and I'm sure you do these things all the time. I'm sure string teachers around here would be interested. I know I would at least be like, what some of the skills, some of the maybe even gaps in skills that you sometimes run into, or seems to be themes of, let's see how to say it. You go to several schools and you seem to find that all these schools are doing this great job, and I feel like here's the thing that they're often missing. Like maybe even just on a level of musicality, something maybe they're leaving out that seems to be a recurring theme.
That's an interesting question. Certainly not looking at any narrow group of schools, but kind of just looking broadly across what's out there. I think there's so much good teaching happening out there, and it's actually the job of coming in and teaching a clinic is really the easy job, because I just show up one day and sprinkle in a few different ideas that are obviously going to be different because I'm just a different person with different experiences. But the people doing the hard work are the people that are doing it every single day with their kids. I think that occasionally, and I can speak to this being that I was a full-time teacher for years, I think what happens is that sometimes we get a little into the trees and kind of lose the forest in terms of a composition. And so we get into, a little bit lower there on the C natural, and, we get into all these technical details, and get your bow a little closer to the bridge and these kinds of things, and kind of lose sight of what is actually happening in this phrase. Why is it interesting? Musically, why is it interesting? It could be just as little as, well, look, when it happened the first time, it was on beat 2, and now all of a sudden it shifted to beat 4. And here's why that's an interesting fact. It could be very small, and really, it's actually, I think what it is that some of these things are so obvious to us, it's true, but trivially true. You look at it and you go, well, yeah, it was on 2, and now it's on 4. And it almost kind of flies under the radar for us, but really for the kids, and really, to the essence of the music, I think sometimes those really simple observations can be the most important things that you could hope to share with your students. So I would say that. I'd say, that there's all these nuts and bolts ideas which have to happen, and you have to get very specific and very technical with the students to give them the information so that they can be successful on a technical level. But when you're trying to shape the piece, I think sometimes just backing up for a second, going, now, why are we making all this effort to play every single note in tune and have a great sound? It's because of this cool musical idea that's happened.
Yeah. I think I like the can't see the forest for the trees idea. I think that's really very true. Or it's something that, like, as a director, we had that idea and we taught it initially, and then all the trees got in the way. And we started. It's like, wait, why were we doing this in the first place?
Right.
So you mentioned you're a percussionist. So you do a lot with full orchestras, and you're dealing with not only, obviously in your years being a band director, you had to get good at dealing with the brass and the woodwinds. And I know I at one point took brass and woodwinds classes, even though I don't remember anything about it. But you're having to deal with all these different instruments, and I imagine over time you've gotten pretty good at knowing a lot of the technical differences between them. But what kind of challenges have you had to overcome when working with instruments that aren't native to you, specifically strings for the purpose of this podcast, but maybe even thinking early on when you first started doing it, when it was probably more of a challenge than it is now?
Yeah, I think that, I had a friend very early on in my career when I realized I wanted to be kind of focused on orchestral conducting, and they were talking about strings and string music ed, and I had a kind of, as a percussionist, kind of a wind and a band background. I student taught as a band director, and I got to work with the orchestras at this is at Berkner High School, and it went very well. I got to work with the orchestras as well, but that was not my focus. I was primarily with the band folks, and I had a friend tell me pretty early on, say, listen, strings, it's great. You can see everything. And, it's funny because that should have clicked with me more than it did, because I'm a percussionist. You can see everything that a percussionist do. You can watch stick heights. You can watch mallet heights. You can see exactly what's going on with the mechanics. Look, vocalists and wind players don't have that ability. These brilliant teachers that teach winds and voice, they're guessing at what your tongue is doing and what your throat's doing and all these things. And the really good ones can hear certain sounds and go, I know what you're doing right there. You're doing that weird thing with your tongue again, or whatever, or your whatever it is. And but I really kind of missed the boat, I think, for a number of years where I could have been an even more effective communicator to strings players had I just looked up a little more and noticed what was going on. And oh, look, yeah, right there where the bow is completely not where it's not at the balance point like it should be, or whatever the technical detail may be. So I think that visual connection from my background as a percussionist, once I kind of understood that, a whole world opens up. Obviously, as you and I'm sure all the listeners know.
It's funny. I was just thinking the other day how often now I find myself looking down at my score, listening to the kids play. And I'm dealing with just strings, and I'm just like, first, I can't hear you. I know you're not close enough to your bridge. And then I say, play it again. And I don't even look over at them another time. And then all of a sudden the sound opens up and I look over and, oh, there they are. They're closer, and just things like that. Yeah. So on that same note, I feel like I've kind of found that, I never can remember the name of this book that Deb Perkins turned me on to at one point, but I've kind of found that non-string players often have a better perspective on the instruments than people that have been playing since middle school, because they do some things without even thinking. And I find that sometimes people will just say, pull your bow, like a violinist will say, pull your bow faster. And as someone that actually started on electric bass, did percussion in high school before I ever did string bass, didn't know what I was doing with strings until probably a couple years into teaching. I had to just learn it on the spot. I feel like I sometimes have that perspective where my first thought is, well, don't just tell them to pull a faster bow. Are they thinking about the placement and the weight also? Have you ever run into situations where you feel like a string player sometimes has too simple of an answer for a complicated thing, or have you felt that you have a unique perspective being a non-string player? Do you feel like you look at it more just like physics based and like a math problem of the string?
That's a very interesting question. I think you put it best the last way you put it, which was that I have a unique perspective. So I think clearly any very good musician who's a strings player of some kind is going to be able to bring the relevant pedagogy into the classroom and be ready on day one, and that's great. I think that especially anytime you're broadening out beyond an all strings class of any kind, for instance, I work with the youth orchestra in Frederick, Maryland. Got all the instruments there, and I do mean all the instruments. We got saxophones, we got euphoniums, we got the whole works in the Frederick Regional Youth Orchestra. It's great, but especially once you broaden out, I think the key is nobody's expecting you to be the expert at every single instrument, and that was never true. And I think that's where the band world is what kind of helped me understand that, is that you don't actually need to be the best trumpet player and clarinet player and viola player and percussionist all in one. You need to be able to provide good information. I think sometimes the way I would describe it is kind of like the beginner's mind. You sometimes you haven't been so indoctrinated into a certain school of thought that you're a little more free to make these observations, where, I almost think like a child, just kind of looking around the room and going, oh, what's that over there? And all the adults are right here where you're supposed to be, and they're not noticing the weird thing up in the corner, kind of thing. So occasionally you'll stumble across things, and I had a fun clinic a while back, and one of the students, they asked me what instrument I played, and I always like to just quiz and say, well, what instrument do you think I play? Because I'm always just trying to figure out what I come off like. And he said, well, I'm pretty sure you're not a strings player. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And at first I thought that was like they were knocking me, it was an all strings group, and I was knocking me down a peg. I said, no, because you had equal comments for all of the instruments. You didn't focus just on the violas or just on the cellos or whatever. You kind of had something for everybody. So I thought, okay, I'll take it.
So, you are working with a non-major orchestra at Hopkins?
At Johns Hopkins, that's right.
Yeah, tell me about that.
Yeah, so I conduct the Hopkins Concert Orchestra. So my official title is something like Assistant Conductor of the Hopkins Symphony Orchestra. That's the umbrella organization which houses 2 orchestras. There's the flagship group by the same name, Hopkins Symphony, and there's an additional group called the Hopkins Concert Orchestra, and I conduct that group, and that's under the music direction of Jed Galen as the head of the whole organization. So I work with him. So I'll cover. I'll assist for all of his concerts with the top group, and then I conduct the other group. And it's been a pleasure. The thing I'll say is I don't think I'll ever have the opportunity to conduct that many PhDs in one room ever again, because you have all these people that are some of them are undergrads at Hopkins. This is like their campus orchestra. Some are graduate students doing working in faculty as well, working in particle physics and just the advanced mathematics and in humanities and every other subject in between. Published authors that are sitting there in my violin section. It's just it's really quite remarkable. And they're using perfectly serviceable Netflix time, sitting with me, making music, and I love it. It's just a beautiful thing to get to be with people who are so turned on by this great music that's how they need to use their free time. It's a beautiful thing, and I walk away so motivated to do even more myself as a professional by the energy that they put into it. So it's a great group. It's been around. I'm trying to remember the founding year, but I think it's been around since around the 70s. So this is my first year. We actually just had our first rehearsal for the last concert cycle of this season for my group.
Have you gotten a feel for? I assume you don't just walk off the podium and say, "All right, see you later," and then you don't talk to any of them again. Have you gotten from any conversations with any of them a feel for what it means to them to get to continue doing this, especially I'm imagining with all the pressures of the other things they're doing, but just in general to, I imagine a lot of them kind of got the feeling that, when they went that path instead of music, when they got out of high school, that was probably about it, and for what it means to them to get to come in and still do that and still play that music.
It's powerful and it's palpable, and one of the things that I really enjoy is that a number of them are very active in communication. They will send emails. I found this other recording of the piece that we're performing in 2 weeks. I thought you'd like to. Maybe you already knew about it, but here. And sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. I go, wow, I haven't heard this recording before, or they've found some new information, or they'll go look up. A lot of them, the faculty ones. They have access to all the journals and things, and so they'll go pull up something that's behind a paywall or something on the university website or something like that, just kind of stuff. But it's great. There's a dialogue because no professional is ever writing the conductor later on going, "Hey, I found this great new recording" or something. They're out of there. They are out of there for sure. As much as I love professionals, it's just a very different environment and a level of enthusiasm for what they do. They really believe it. They really believe in it.
Yeah, I've got a few students that are going on and doing med something, and they're at why am I drawing a blank right now? UTD. UTD. Yeah, that's right. Anyway, they're down there and they've continued playing every single semester for 4 years.
Yeah.
I think since they graduated, and I just love getting to go in and play that music all the time. And they were just the hardcore orchestra members all through high school, and I know it means a lot to them. So
and sometimes it's like that is their only thing that's not their object of focus. Their major, or they're working on their dissertation, or if they're already a faculty member. And by the way, I don't want to leave out, since I'm putting this in here, that there are also a number of community members. It's actually kind of sometimes referred to as a town and gown orchestra. So there's both the folks that are part of the university, but it's actually it is the community orchestra for the city of Baltimore, where like in Chicago there's a Chicago Civic Symphony and organizations like that. Well, that's the role we serve within the city of Baltimore. So we have a lot of folks that have no affiliation whatsoever with the university that are part of it as well. But where this might be their one major activity a lot of times outside of their area of focus, whatever research they're working on. And that's pretty inspiring too, because for instance, we'll go on break sometimes, and you'll see I would probably be checking my phone or something. Well, they're getting their textbook out and they're reviewing some notes or something. I'll watch this. They'll spend all 14 and a half minutes of their break just reviewing their physics work or whatever it is. It's pretty crazy. Beautiful.
It's a different world.
It really is.
Okay, so I see that you've done some stuff with church orchestras and I assume choirs and stuff also. And what percentage in most of your situations of those groups have been volunteers?
Good question. So I guess I would start by framing the landscape a little bit, which is a little different. My two frames of reference really are just Texas and Maryland. And what I will say is that in Maryland, probably the percentage, I don't have the hard figures behind this. I should check this, but as far as I understand, that the church attendance is considerably lower there overall. And as a result, you end up just not having kind of the critical mass that you might wish for to have an all-volunteer group quite as often. Where I sang here for a time. I sang the Highland Park Chorale with Highland Park Presbyterian, and that was an almost all volunteer. It was about 50 volunteer people, and then they'd have one section leader each that was paid. Well, up there you'll often find where you'll have an all-professional either quartet or octet maybe. Or something like that, and or you'll see where it'll be, 5 or 6 members of the congregation plus, a number of section leaders. Now, oddly, after I've made this point about there being lots of paid work as a chorister there, I happen to be working now at Hunts Memorial United Methodist Church, where in Towson, which is a suburb of Baltimore, which is an all-volunteer choir. So we will occasionally bring in some additional singers at holidays and things like that, but they happen not to be have any paid singers. I feel the same way as I do about the Hopkins Symphony, in that the passion for spending your free time making music is just such a beautiful thing, and it really does fuel all the work that I do, just to be constantly re-engaging, because I think all of us that do this in the profession, at some point we were in high school or wherever it was that we go, man, I just want to be doing this all the time. This is great, and then you get into your career, and then other considerations come in, and sometimes that magic wears off with some people. And being around folks for whom it never wore off because they never went into the profession really helps invigorate me within the profession.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I think as long as we're not talking about anybody specific naming specific situations where someone would go, hey, that was me, or they like, I imagine in those situations where you're dealing with volunteers, how do you, I feel like this could be similar to, working with a non-varsity or a sub-non-varsity orchestra around here. Someone that has a big passion for it, but maybe struggles in the performance side of it. Things you do to help them and motivate them to overcome some technical obstacles and things like that, I imagine comes into play sometimes. And any things that you found help in those situations?
Yeah, and anything I do say, even generally, is not going to be geared towards. I'll just only speak to past engagements. We'll just put that on the record. That anything I say going forward here. But I think actually I got an even broader point that even doesn't speak to any specific person. And this is actually a principle I think hopefully we learn in high school or college as performers ourselves, that I think we should translate, whether it be to pros or whether it be to volunteers. And that is, we need to be super hard on ourselves when we're practicing. We want to be perfectionists. We want to go after every single musical detail that we possibly can and dig in there as deeply as we can. No matter how good it is, we're going to go in there and dig even deeper to make it better tomorrow. And have that level of just totalitarian demand that the music be as excellent as we can possibly make it. And then when we get to the performance, I think this is one of the most beautiful aspects of music making generally. And then we get to the performance, we have to forgive ourselves. And we have to just let ourselves be the messy, imperfect people that we are, and have that come right out into the performance. When we mess up something that we knew we could have gotten right, but somehow in the moment we messed it up somehow. I think we have to have that kind of spirit of forgiveness and goodwill towards ourselves. And then in the case that you're talking about in terms of conducting people or leading a group, certainly you as the leader have to show that forgiveness and that grace about it. So when you get out of there, in the end, it was never going to be perfect, because music, the best orchestra in the world, I love watching rehearsals of Simon Rattle talking about really, going, can we actually do the forte that's written here in the Strauss tone poem, or he's doing some major work, but he's doing really basic things sometimes, and just saying, hey, let's observe what's in the score. So with the best orchestra in the world. So no matter who you are, no matter what level you're at, there's that duality between absolute demand and then absolute grace and love for your fellow musicians and self-love in the act of performance. So that'd be my guiding. I don't actually know if that answered your question or not, but that's my answer.
I think it made me think of a lot of times, especially like working with the varsity group. We work, and like in class, I'll just be a grouch about missing a dynamic, or somebody misses something we fixed over and over. And then we get to the performance, and I wish, this is only audio, I wish I could like show like the face that I will make to them, because I know the audience can't see it. They miss that shift, and I just kind of like make a silly face at them and smile, because like, what are you going to do? That moment has passed. It's like, you are forgiven right now. We can't go back and do it again, so let's continue having fun.
Just to piggyback off of that, there's the reverse angle where you'll get after a performance, and you've been hounding your kids after, get this thing here, and then in the performance, maybe one of the kids still blew it, or something else went wrong, or whatever, and they'll come apologize, or they'll want to say something about it, and I'm going, oh, look, that was the performance. That wasn't rehearsal. We're good. That was great.
We can't go back and do anything.
No, I love, just look at the totality, Actually, and getting back to your earlier question about, things, that'd be another thing to think about is how we train our students to think about performances. We spend so much time on rehearsals because we're in rehearsal all the time. We're in performances much less of the time than we are in rehearsals. So we don't have nearly as much time. So I kind of sometimes think we should spend more time, and I'm talking to myself as much as anybody else, preparing them for the difference that is a performance. It's a completely different musical experience. And then on the backside, really congratulating and spending the time to help them make that differentiation that we've been talking about.
Yeah. So Symphony 1 is something that, as Facebook friends with you, I've seen a lot about. I've seen a lot of things about it. And I think, I'm laughing thinking about it, I've probably donated. I have a memory of donating to Symphony 1 and probably not fully understanding what it is. So can you talk about what that is, mostly so I can understand, but also so the listeners can, and talk about like what you do with that?
Well, thanks. Yeah, so Symphony No. 1 is a chamber orchestra that I founded along with a couple of extremely brilliant musicians and enterprising undergraduates. They're both about 10 years younger than me, but you'd never know it from either their musicianship or their professionalism. And I'll name check them both, Nick Bentz and Sean Myers, who both have gone on to great work. Nick is out in LA at this point, and Sean is currently getting his doctorate at UT in saxophone performance. And both great guys. Nick is a violinist and a composer who definitely I would put out the word to any people out there that are commissioning works to call up Nick Bentz for a great work. He did some great work with us. But the three of us kind of got the organization started, and the principle from kind of an early point was, look, there are all these, there's a traditional orchestra, and they're going to play the classics one night, and then they're going to have James Taylor come in the next night, and they're going to do all those things. There's going to be, there are new music ensembles that are strictly about performing music of the last 20 to 50 years. Okay. And maybe there's some other kind of group out there that's neither of those things, that is focused on contemporary music in a very substantive way, but is not solely dedicated to only that music. And that's the space that we've occupied. And we came up with a concert format that's kind of our core product, if you will, where we choose some extant repertoire and use the instrumentation for chamber orchestra, for small groups, anywhere from, we've done the Stravinsky L'Histoire Septet Ensemble. I think the largest group that we've put together is 35 musicians, somewhere in that range. of size, mostly one to a part, and commission a new work that uses the same or almost the same instrumentation. The idea being that it may help encourage future performances, so that if you have a good piece and people listen to it go, this is great, and then they want to go, okay, I want to make a concert with this. There's an economic component when you're looking at professionals where if it's not a full-time orchestra, then the incentive structure is let's always have full orchestra every single week and not do chamber because we're paying the tubist whether or not we have any tuba music for the next month. So let's go ahead and do it, right? So that's the economic model on a full-time group. For a per-service orchestra, it's the exact reverse, where you're going, well, if we're going to have to hire, say, a saxophonist for a concert, well, we better use them the whole time and not just have it be for one piece, because it's the reverse problem. Yeah. So I'm not an MBA person. I don't have a business background in any other way than just being self-taught. Yeah. But I from an early point realized I didn't have the bandwidth to be really thinking heavily on the artistic side and the business side at once. I needed a unified model that could work, and so that's what we kind of got excited about, was that we had a business model and an artistic model that were both internally satisfying and that worked well together. And so as an example, I bring up saxophone because we ended up doing we wanted to do, there's a great arrangement of Mahler's Fourth Symphony for chamber orchestra. This is, I think, 14 or 15 players. It was done by Arnold Schoenberg, and we wanted to do that piece. I knew that going into it. I wanted to do this chamber orchestra version of Mahler 4, and we're going to commission a new piece. And the last thing I'll say is that we always want to do we say substantial works by emerging composers. If I don't leave anybody with anything more than 5 words, it's substantial works by emerging composers. And so we wanted to write a big piece to go along with the Mahler 4. Mahler 4 is big enough as it is, but we wanted to do something else. So we commissioned, ended up being a saxophone concerto that we put with it. So we ended up having a great concert. So the idea would hopefully be that somebody comes along and goes, hey, I want to do that Mahler. It's a pretty popular arrangement to rent and do. And if somebody else comes along and says, what should I put with this? Well, we ended up commissioning a very nice saxophone concerto by a friend of mine, Andrew Boss, a very fine composer. And so the two work very well together, and they're the same instrumentation. So you can put the two together for a reasonable kind of economic hit, as far as not having to pay a bunch of extra players who only play on one piece.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'm glad I donated to that.
Yeah, I'm very grateful. We are as well.
I was like, I like Jordan. I don't know
what it is,
but here we go. That's great. Yeah. So, a lot of the listeners here are going to be, string education people primarily, or people going to go into it, or people retired from it, that kind of stuff. And, it's become a bigger thing, especially around here, for people to want to go to advance their conducting abilities and do stuff like that. And we definitely have many people around here who, went on after getting an ed degree and got their master's in orchestral conducting because they wanted to expand that. Do you have any advice to anyone in education or not looking to advance their conducting skills, where to start, inspirations that you've had, anything like that?
Yeah, well, the first thing I'd love to say is that I feel that there's this, I think we should just call out this artificial boundary that seems to exist. And I think we all know it's mostly malarkey, that there's really no such thing in terms of music education versus, I'm a professional conductor, and where one stops and the other, starts. I don't really know exactly what it all is. It's all been mixed up, and my whole career, the two have been mixed up, and it's never been all one or all the other. And so the first thing I would say is, if you're thinking that you want some kind of career that involves working with professionals as well as working with students, or some mixture, or university work, or whatever it may be, that the greatest tool if you're currently a music educator, if you're a band or orchestra teacher, choir teacher for that matter, your current ensembles that you're working with, your students, that is your greatest resource, because you're going in every day and conducting for hours on end every single day. No young conductor who just got a master's in conducting is just going to go out there and try to make their way without being involved in teaching is getting that kind of experience. Yeah. You got podium time just coming out of your ears. Now the question is, how to use that time, And I had a wonderful teacher. This was Brad Kent, who's the director of UIL for the state now, but he was one of my professors at Texas A&M Commerce, and he said it very well. He said, "Your ensemble, either you're training them or they're training you. It's one or the other. So you have to decide which is it going to be." And the way that comes into play, I think, if you're going to talk strictly about conducting, is you could very easily fall into a lot of bad habits with how you conduct. I think sometimes it feels like you're helping more. If you're working with a group who's a little less experienced, let's say, and you don't, and it starts to feel like, I have to be extremely demonstrative and I have to use these big gestures or bigger beats or something to, really get their attention, or I need to always have the metronome on, let's say, or something like that for them to get the beat or to keep the pulse or something. And I don't think that's always true. And if you can have a little space to just go into your conductor brain and think about it, actually, for one thing, you're going to train your musicians to be much more mature musicians if you can wean them off of that, some of those types of conducting behaviors. And while you're at it, you'll be training yourself to have a technique that's going to be able to work for you and not against you if you go out and apply. So yeah, I would say that, and I would say that if you can use it wisely, and one of the ways I think you can use it wisely is if you're not yet prepared to go start, let's say, on a master's or a doctorate in conducting, that you avail yourself of as many local opportunities as you can to sit in rehearsals with professional groups. Mm-hmm. Go look up, what are you interested in? There's, we're in Dallas right now. There's Dallas Bach Society. There's new music groups. There's bands. Dallas Winds. Go watch their rehearsals. Go to Dallas Symphony. Go watch rehearsals there. Most of these places are shockingly easy to see yourself in the front door or the back door, or go any place you want. I've been places before, and I had waited for weeks and thought, and I was going to plot through it all, and then I got there and there was nobody at the security door. I just walked right in with no problem, and it was like, why did I waste all this time worrying if I could come into this rehearsal? It was perfectly fine. So be smart about it. Talk to the conductor in advance, or try to get a hold of them, or what have you. But go sit in rehearsals and then go take lessons. When I finished my master's, I was back in Dallas, and I took lessons with Paul Phillips at SMU. Probably the best money I ever spent. His advice is just sage from day one. He's just a absolutely brilliant musician and musical thinker and musical analyst, a conductor analyst. As he talks you through, he can help think through what you're struggling to think through and give you good answers, and that'll help you keep you kind of on the straight and narrow as you're teaching each day. Now, your teaching experience is podium time that's supplementing your great training that you're getting in these other private ways, and the two can work in tandem. If you want to go that route and you leave off the other, then you could be in danger occasionally of falling prey to some of the behaviors that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, anything else you'd want the listeners to know?
If anybody wants to get in touch, I'll throw one out to you, and that is, I want to encourage any listener out there, especially if we're looking at music educators. I think it's becoming increasingly important as the years go by. I mean, it's always been important, but I think the awareness of its importance is only starting to really get where it needs to be. That we need to be doing more. And I'm talking to myself first and foremost, and to anybody else who'll listen to me, to diversify the repertoire that we program with our students. I think that it is increasingly possible to program really great programs of any kind of ensemble. I'm not just thinking of orchestras, but any kind of ensemble or small group, large group, and really be thinking about, are there women composers that that wrote a really great piece of music, or composers of color that we could be highlighting alongside of all these other great composers that are out there that are writing music that's absolutely at the highest possible quality. So this is not a tokenization effort. This is an effort just to simply seek the kind of equity that I think probably most people would agree in principle that that's where everyone would like to be. But I think it's time to take more substantive steps in that direction. I'll just mention my personal hobby horse. Another thing you might see me constantly beating the drum about on Facebook is Florence Price, who's a fantastic composer. She was the first African American woman to ever have a piece performed by a major American orchestra. It was in 1933 with Frederick Stock and the Chicago Symphony. Performed her first symphony at that time at the Chicago World's Fair. It was the first time that it had ever happened before. And her music kind of fell into not being super well known by the larger, I think, white establishment in the 65 years from her death in 53 until 2018, when the New Yorker and the New York Times, within about a week of each other, published two different major stories on Price. And that's what got my attention. I'm a very recent bandwagon jumper, but there have been a lot of great scholars and musicians that have been working on this for a long time, holding the torch, and only now is it kind of flowering into this larger thing. So I'm some small part of that. I like to blog about her. If people want to look up more information about her, my website is jordanrsmith.com, and I've got several posts up there. People can read a little more about her or get in touch with me about her. But I would definitely recommend, and I'll just, since this is a string audience, there's this one great piece I'll throw out there, which is her, since you have the privilege of going off menu as you wish in terms of a piece for a contest, is her Quartet in G major from 1929 is a fantastic piece of music. Such a great piece of music. And I'd love to see that showing up on people's UAL contest programs in the next few years. I think it could work actually at several different levels. It's not actually the most technically difficult thing, but musically a very rewarding piece. I got to do it, a small segment of it this past year, and highly recommend it to folks to check out. So that's my pitch, is Florence Price. Check her out.
We hope you enjoyed our discussion with Jordan Randall Smith. The featured educational work at the end of today's episode is Andante Comodamente from Symphony No. 1 by Kalinikov, arranged by Sluter. You can find it at luxmusic.com.
If you have any questions or suggestions for the show, shoot us an email at rightofstring@gmail.com.
Also, if you haven't already, please subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts and join us for our next episode.
See you next time. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.
you.